They got to spike it.
Picks up 11. Miami is one. Zero's on the clock.
When your team loses, it sucks no matter what. But at what point does a loss become humiliating? The definition of this word is causing someone to feel ashamed and foolish by injuring their dignity and self-respect. When it comes to the NFL, this can be experienced in multiple ways. Let's begin with perhaps the most obvious, which is point differential. There are levels to this. Losses within one score often sting the most, but at least your team hung in the balance. Losing by 2 scores? Okay, they were the better team that day. 3 scores? Alright, we can start calling these blowouts. One may begin to argue that this is where the humiliation begins. Losing by at least 30? Jeez, what an embarrassment. 40? Wow, you're going to be the laughingstock of the league that week. Then losing by more than 50? That's a defeat of catastrophic proportion. In roughly 13,000 NFL games since 1966, a loss this horrific has only happened 14 times. In terms of regular season games, the biggest margin of victory is 59 points, which happened on 2 separate occasions, although one of these was clearly worse. The 1976 game between the Falcons and Rams was lopsided from the start, but after jumping out on top 38-0, the Rams poured it on in the fourth, scoring 21 more. The 2009 game was way different than this. An unexpected snowstorm hit New England in Week 6, and early on, it seemed as if weather was going to affect both teams dramatically, but by the second quarter, the Patriots were adjusted, and the Titans could not figure anything out. Brady went on to throw 5 touchdowns in the second quarter alone, leading to a halftime score of 45-0. The modern NFL had never seen anything like this. After another touchdown to Moss early in the third, Brady was on pace to put up untouchable passing records, possibly in the ballpark of 9 to 10 touchdowns. But understandably so, they went to their backups early in the third. And even then, Brian Hoyer managed to lead a touchdown drive and put them up 59-0 before entering the fourth quarter. Crazy enough, the Patriots dropped a touchdown pass in the fourth, and Vince Young barely escaped a safety later on. So really, the Patriots should have had more points. By the end, the Patriots had set numerous records. Brady in 2.5 quarters threw for 380 yards and 6 touchdowns. Meanwhile, Kerry Collins and Vince Young combined for -7 passing yards and 2 interceptions. By point differential standards, this is the most humiliating regular season loss in NFL history. But a regular season loss only means so much. When it happens in the playoffs, now that's a much bigger deal. But before we get into that, shout out to today's sponsor, SeatGeek. Football season is well underway, and let me explain how SeatGeek, a longtime partner on this channel, works. They gather tickets from all across the web and put them into one area, making buying simple. They have everything from football, baseball, basketball, concerts, festivals, or more. And with football season back, why not go to one of your local college or NFL games? The atmosphere is unlike any other. SeatGeek rates every ticket from 0 to 10 to make sure that you're getting a good deal, with green meaning good and red meaning bad. And for first-time buyers, use code KTO at checkout for $20 off your first purchase. Make sure to click the link in the description to download the app. Looking at the biggest point differentials in NFL playoff history, the Dolphins were on the receiving end of the largest playoff loss in the Super Bowl era. From the get-go, this was a slaughter. In just the first 18 minutes, Jacksonville was up 38-0, which was even more than what the Patriots game was at that point. The Jags continued to pour it on, finishing the game winning 62-7. What made matters worse for the Dolphins was that their coach Jimmy Johnson resigned the following day, and this was also their legendary quarterback Dan Marino's final game he ever played. Now, even though this was a divisional playoff game, the stakes are still not as high as the actual Super Bowl, and the biggest loss in Super Bowl history goes to the Denver Broncos. In 1990, they ran into the juggernaut that was the 49ers. They were unbelievable at the time, and this game was hardly competitive from the start. MVP Joe Montana put on a clinic, and the game ended in a 55-10 beatdown. The next closest Super Bowl blowout was a 36-point victory by the Bears in 1986. I can't help but wonder if this game had a psychological impact on the Broncos the following year, since they would finish with a disappointing 5-11 record. This was their worst post-merger record at the time, and with the context of the years before and after, it seems like an odd year out. So it's perhaps a good example of a Super Bowl hangover. But that 45-point loss in the Super Bowl comes nowhere near the most lopsided matchup in NFL championship history. When you go beyond the Super Bowl era, you find a game so outrageous, you question how it was a championship game in the first place. In 1940, 36,000 strong gathered to watch the NFL championship between the Washington Redskins and the Chicago Bears. It was a heavily anticipated matchup, considering that these two teams faced off just a few weeks prior, near the end of the regular season. That previous contest saw the Redskins eke out a 7-3 victory over the Bears. And following the game, Washington's owner George Marshall called the Bears crybabies and quitters when the going got tough. Talk about pre-game fuel. Bears coach George Halas showed his team the newspaper quotes prior to their rematch, and they made Washington pay. Big time. After not scoring a touchdown in that previous game, the Bears scored 11 of them, finishing with 73 points in the most brutal beatdown in the history of the NFL. The sheer absurdity of that final score helped spread awareness of pro football throughout the nation and promoted its growth, as well as the fact that Washington sucked. The two most hilarious footnotes from this game was that the Bears literally had 3 pick sixes in one quarter. And even better than that, the Bears had kicked so many footballs into the stands on PATs that they apparently never got back, that after the 9th touchdown, the ref went up to George Halas and was like, "Hey man, can you just run or pass instead of kicking it? We're running out of footballs." Now, as humiliating as losing by 73 points in a championship is, one would argue that the shame is much greater when you looked like you were going to clearly win than don't. I think most of us who witnessed what happened in Super Bowl 51 still don't believe it. The Falcons had a 25-point lead closing into the fourth quarter in the Super Bowl and somehow lost that game. It amazingly topped the ending of what happened 2 years prior with Russell Wilson on the goal line. But in general, there's something mystical about 28-3. I mean, there has been multiple other games in NFL history that saw this same score that ended with similar results. In 1987, the Bucs jumped out to a 28-3 lead on the Cardinals, and Neil Lomax led a furious comeback to win in the fourth quarter, 31-28. In 2014, the Tennessee Titans led the Cleveland Browns 28-3, and somehow, Brian Hoyer, of all quarterbacks, orchestrated a comeback win 29-28. Amazingly, this was just weeks after Cleveland trailed 27-3 to Pittsburgh, came all the way back to tie it up, and then lost as time expired. It's almost as if, as long as you're not up 28-3, you're good. Of course, there is one more 28-3 comeback, and this one is the most humiliating of them all. In the first round of the 1993 playoffs, the Bills hosted the Houston Oilers. The Bills were the better team, but they were without their star quarterback Jim Kelly that day. Houston took full advantage. Not only did they jump out to a 28-3 lead, but they tacked on one more touchdown, making it 35-3. And somehow, the Oilers completely fell apart, and they allowed backup quarterback Frank Reich to throw 4 touchdowns in the third quarter, and they gave up 5 touchdowns in less than 15 minutes. They went on to lose to the Bills in overtime, 41-38. There has been over 100 20-point comebacks in NFL history, but this is the only 30-plus point comeback the league has ever seen. It's literally more common to lose by 50, and for it to happen in the playoffs and against a backup is inconceivable. Bills backup Frank Reich lasted 13 years in the NFL, and in his very few opportunities as a starter, he went 7-15. And the Oilers, up by 5 scores in the second half, gave him one of those victories. Just mind-blowing. Now, it's humiliating to lose by 70, and it's humiliating to be up by 35 and still lose. But what causes more shame than when you are guaranteed to win and still lose? As a Browns fan, I can say this with confidence. No one knows how to lose better than the Browns. In 2022, up by 2 scores versus the Jets, they had a 99.9% chance of winning, then lost. It was the largest lead blown in the NFL with less than 2 minutes left since 2001 by, guess who? The Browns. That was against the Bears, and it was embarrassing. Just 1 year after that, the Browns found themselves up by 2 versus the Chiefs with an all but guaranteed victory.
Cleveland Browns remember the Chicago Bears. It's not over till it's over. Last year in one of the wackiest finishes you will ever see.
On the last play of the game, Browns defender Dwayne Rudd thought he had tackled Trent Green and proceeded to throw his helmet. This led to a penalty, and instead of the game being over, there was one more untimed down. This led to a chip shot field goal, which the Chiefs hit, and they went on to win. Now, in some fairness to Dwayne Rudd, he would redeem himself later that year. In Week 17 versus the Falcons with 36 seconds left, he made a clutch tackle on the goal line that helped punch the Browns' ticket to the playoffs. Now, the worst mistake ever made when a team was guaranteed to win wasn't Dwayne Rudd, or even Leon Lett on Thanksgiving Day. It actually belongs to the 1978 New York Giants. In a midseason divisional matchup between the 5-6 Giants and the 6-5 Eagles, there were major playoff implications. If the Giants won, they would match the Eagles' record, and then they would stand second place in the division. If the Eagles won, the Giants' odds of making the playoffs would drastically go down, as they would have to fight uphill the rest of the season. So anyway, down by 5 with less than 2 minutes left, the Eagles had their last chance to score a touchdown, but then they threw the game-sealing interception. All the Giants had to do was kneel out the clock to victory. On the first play, Pizarchik awkwardly fell down in the backfield, but it was done safe enough to keep the clock moving. Then, a fight broke out.
Poise, poise, poise. Keep your poise.
Now, pissed off by what just happened, the Giants coach decided that instead of taking a knee or another quarterback fall down, he decided to call a run play. One last FU to his opponent. And this is what happened next.
Set win as the Giants lead 17-12 and we're inside 30 seconds. The Eagles have no timeouts. Wait a minute. Here's a free foot. I don't believe it. The Eagles pick it up and Herman Edwards runs it in for a touchdown. An incredible development.